Tonight, President Trump reaches out to evangelicals. His speech at today's Road to Majority conference. And round one, Democratic presidential candidates gear up to take the stage in their first debate. The big issues they're expected to tackle. Plus, crisis at the southern border. The latest move by lawmakers to send humanitarian aid to migrants there. All that and more tonight on Faith Nation.
For President Trump, it's promises made, promises kept. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. Well, judicial appointments, abortion, and criminal justice reform, all very important issues to many evangelicals.
And President Trump brought all of them up today, speaking to supporters at a conference here in Washington. Abigail Robertson is there with tonight's top story.
President Trump addressed a friendly, exuberant crowd today here at Faith and Freedom's Road to Majority conference, touting what he says were promises made and kept to his evangelical voting base.
We're proudly defending the sanctity of life.
The biggest applause line of the day greeted his pro-life record.
Every child, born and unborn, is made in the holy image of God, and that is why I have asked Congress to prohibit the late-term abortion of babies. And they'll do that.
Another positive, his impact not just on the Supreme Court, but lower courts as well.
I will soon appoint my 145th judge to interpret the Constitution as written.
A big factor in why 81% of white evangelicals supported him in 2016.
Democrats are determined to pack the courts with radical left judges who will impose their own far-left views on the American people.
Trump also hit on plans for the future.
If we win the House back, keep the Senate, and win the presidency, we're going to have a plan that blows away Obamacare. It'll be less expensive, and it'll be far better health care and health insurance. And we'll be announcing it over the next month or so.
Going back on previous statements that voters will have to wait until after 2020 for the GOP health care plan.
The choice of our future has never been clearer. The radical left offers a vision of socialism, censorship, high taxes, open borders, and extreme late-term abortion.
And while taking a few hits at his Democrat opponents,
Sleepy Joe Biden,
he admitted one thing he admires about the Democrat Party.
They stick together. They vote in a group. You don't see them going haywire.
And promised the crowd if he's given 4 more years, he'll keep fighting for religious freedom.
We know that faith and prayer, not federal regulation, defines the moral character of our country.
The event carries on into the weekend with other notable speakers like Vice President Mike Pence and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Reporting from the Road to Majority Conference, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abby. Well, 2020 Democrats are getting ready to debate tonight in Miami. And while President Trump won't be on the stage with them, his policies certainly will be. Amber Strong has a look at how the immigration battle may be front and center.
One night, 10 competitors. The first round of the Democratic presidential debates kicks off tonight. And the biggest challenge of the evening, standing out among the crowd.
That shouldn't be a problem for Senator Elizabeth Warren. She'll be smack dab in the middle. On her left and right, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke and Senator Cory Booker. A new poll from Move On shows Warren is also center stage among progressive voters, leading the way in early voting states.
These children pose no threat to people here in the United States of America.
30 miles from the debate stage Wednesday, Warren visited the Homestead Shelter, the largest detention center for unaccompanied minors in the U.S. She's called for the decriminalization of illegal border crossing. But what do the other 10 candidates say on the issue? Beto O'Rourke has a comprehensive plan that calls for a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, but differs on decriminalization. A move first suggested by former HUD Secretary Julian Castro.
Is that somebody comes here, they're undocumented, they're not committing a crime like human trafficking or drug trafficking, then that should be treated as a civil violation. So, you know, I'm disappointed in Congressman O'Rourke.
The candidates also disagree on other top issues like Medicare for all and impeachment.
Differences aside, the biggest challenger may be the guy that's not even in the room. Frontrunner Joe Biden will square off against the other 9 competitors Thursday night. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Amber. Well, the clock is ticking for Congress to pass legislation to send aid money to the southern border. The House and Senate must agree on a measure before their 4th of July recess.
Now, with a deadline quickly approaching, a heartbreaking new photo has become a rallying cry for lawmakers to act. It shows a Salvadoran father and infant daughter who tried to cross a river, who tried to cross the Rio Grande.
That's right. And today, the Senate's minority leader took to the floor, using the image to call on the White House to do more for migrants.
President Trump, I want you to look at this photo. These are not drug dealers or vagrants or criminals. They are people simply fleeing a horrible situation in their home country for a better life.
And national security correspondent Eric Phillips joins us now for more on the crisis at the border. Eric.
Well, Jenna and John, as you said, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are scrambling to pass joint legislation that will allow billions of dollars in aid to flow to the southern border. Some are frustrated, though, that politics may be getting in the way. A group of protesters gathered outside of a Border Patrol facility in El Paso, Texas, to rally against conditions inside of a similar facility in Clint, Texas, including inadequate food, lack of medical care, no soap, and no adult supervision.
The reason I'm out here is because, you know, on just a gut level, I see myself, I see my family, I see my neighbors, I see my students in these migrants, you know. Almost literally, I have students who come over from the border almost every day to go to school, to be taught here at the school that I teach.
This situation is child abuse. It is an atrocity that violates every value we have, not only as Americans, but as moral beings.
The Democratic-controlled House just passed a $4.5 billion border aid package that the White House says it will veto, saying it will hamper border security efforts. The Senate passed a bipartisan border bill, and now frustrated senators want the House to accept and approve their version.
I'm sorry that this Congress has left not only our southern border exposed and vulnerable, but has left children exploited day after day after day. And until this wretched Congress decides to do something, I don't know why we even bother to have these hearings.
Not biting his tongue at all, and no surprises here, the House border bill failed in the Senate today with a vote of 37 to 55. The Senate passed a version earlier today, and problem is both sides need to agree on one plan before it heads to the White House, and it's not looking like that will happen very easily. Back to you.
Thanks, Eric. Well, Robert Mueller is scheduled to appear before Congress next month on July 17th after the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees issued subpoenas to Mueller. They want to question him about his report on the Russia investigation. President Trump called the latest move presidential harassment. His attorney, Jay Sekulow, says Mueller's testimony likely won't differ from the report and that he should also answer questions about irregularities during the investigation.
And here now for more, A.B. Stoddard with Real Clear Politics and David Brody, CBN's chief political analyst. A.B., let's start with you. You know, this Mueller report, Mueller said that his testimony was this report. What new can we expect? What do you think?
Well, I think that what the members of both sides of the aisle are going to be asking is sort of a question about process. So the Democrats are going to say, you laid out all of this potential obstruction, but then said that the Office of Legal Counsel rules do not permit you to indict a sitting president. If this were just another citizen, would this person be indictable? Would they have, with all these actions to impede an investigation, would this rise to the level of obstruction of justice? The Republicans, of course, will be asking about the origins of the probe. And Robert Mueller should be prepared to defend his probe and the integrity of his investigation and the people that worked on that team. Many, many questions have arisen about that, and it's time to lay them to rest either way. And he's going to have to talk about why he didn't choose to subpoena the president as a witness and just let him answer questions only on one subject, collusion or legal conspiracy, which there was not enough evidence to find, and not obstruction, and not to sit for an interview. And so there's a lot of questions about the making of the report and the tea leaves that he intentionally sort of lays out in the report that the Sphinx-like Mueller is going to have to come clean on. And I understand that he doesn't want to face a partisan circus, and it certainly will be a lot of theater and a lot of wasted time. But there are serious questions on both sides that need to be addressed.
David, to the story that everyone's talking about today, we've all seen that haunting image of the father and his daughter on the banks of the Rio Grande River. How powerful is that image, and does it potentially change the conversation on immigration?
It's extremely powerful. Does it change the conversation? Look, for 20-plus years, they've been talking about immigration on the Hill. Nothing's gotten done. Now, having said that, images are powerful, so possibly. But look, I mean, think ultimately, the president has a lot to think about here. I mean, he's moved by images, typically. That's what we know about this president. The question is, will he be moved necessarily by this one? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that it all gets back to that zero-tolerance policy that we hear so much about. And if you hear the White House talk about it, they're saying, look, this is acting as a deterrent. They went zero tolerance, so you wouldn't have to make that trek to the border and see images like you see that we saw today. And I think that's going to be their point, that the humanitarian thing to do, believe it or not, is to have the zero tolerance policy as a deterrent. But I don't know how sustainable that is in the long term.
Yeah, David, today the president addressed evangelicals. You were at the speech and also in some behind-the-scenes meetings. A question on a lot of people's minds is evangelicals turned out for him in 2016, unlike they did any other president in history. Do you think it'll be the same story in 2020? What are you sensing? What are you hearing?
Well, I can tell you this, that Ralph Reed told us today after President Trump spoke that he thinks that 87%, he doesn't think Trump's going to get 87% of a white evangelical vote, but he believes that's his ceiling here. Now, Donald Trump got 81% of the white conservative evangelical vote in 2016. Ralph Reed says that he believes Donald Trump, his prediction is that he will get 84% of the white conservative evangelical vote. That's a new figure that we're first time hearing today. I think that is a potential stretch, because if he gets 84% of the white conservative evangelical vote, he's going to win. Doesn't matter who's going to run against Trump.
I want to ask one quick question to the both of you. A new Morning Consult survey shows what Democrats want to hear in tonight's debate. Take a look at this graphic. Climate change ranking #1, followed by gun policy and abortion. Student loan debt, Bernie Sanders' issues, is near the bottom. What do you guys make of this what Democrats want to hear about?
Well, this is consistent with all of the polling that we've seen, that climate is always the #1 issue, and that Democratic issues rank at the top of the policy priorities of Democratic voters. What's interesting is that then they don't choose as a front runner someone who is, known as a bold new progressive that's going to remake society. They're choosing the former Vice President Joe Biden because in polling like the Fox one that we just saw this week, by more than 70%, they want steady and reliable leadership over bold and new ideas. What'll be interesting is that all these issues will get some airtime, but immigration will certainly, because it's sort of in the news and Elizabeth Warren went to a detention center, be a headliner. What I'm listening for is where is the questions that Democrats don't want to answer, which is where they agree with President Trump. Are they isolationist? Are they protectionist? Where are they on trade, on withdrawing troops in the Middle East? Those are the places where they're going to squirm, but those are important questions, too.
Yeah. All right, Abby Stoddard and David Brody, thank you both. Thanks, guys. Well, coming up, President Trump is on his way to Japan for the G20 summit, why all eyes are on talks between the U.S. and China. President Trump is on his way tonight to the G20 summit in Japan.
That's right, Jenna. And he has a big to-do list while there, including making headway on foreign policy with Iran and North Korea.
CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now with the details. And Ben, settling the trade dispute with China is also on the agenda.
Yeah, Jenna, John, you're right. Tariffs to the tune of $300 billion ride on these upcoming talks. The president will not only sit down with Chinese President Xi, but also Russia's President Vladimir Putin to discuss the troubles with Iran. President Trump boarded Marine One for 2 days of diplomacy at the G20 summit in Japan.
And we're going to be meeting with a lot of different countries, many of whom have been taking advantage of the United States, but not so much anymore, and soon not at all anymore.
The U.S. economy orbits around China as the two nations aim to patch up their differences on trade. President Trump says he does not have a deadline for the next round of tariffs, saying he wants to meet with President Xi first. So does a lot ride on these talks?
Yes and no. I think that people who were expecting some kind of trade deal either before the G20 to be initialed at the G20 or even to be sort of hammered out at the G20 are frankly just unrealistic in their expectations.
Senior fellow Dean Chang is a China expert at the Heritage Foundation. He says best case scenario is Trump holds the line on tariffs, maybe even drop them back to 10%, with negotiations continuing into 2020. But if talks don't go well, tariffs could follow on $300 billion of Chinese goods.
Given how the Chinese apparently revamped the agreement at the last minute earlier this year, there is the possibility that President Xi will disappoint President Trump, and we could see the imposition of tariffs after he gets back.
Iran dealings continue to disappoint the president, with the regime closing the road to diplomacy. This after the president hit specific leaders with new economic sanctions after the country shot down an American drone last week. What is the message for U.S. allies on Iran? Do you think President Trump might say, you do business with them, expect to be hit by sanctions?
I think that that's the message that's going not only to U.S. allies, but to anyone who deals with Iran, is that the U.S. is absolutely going to crack down. It is going to use all the tools in its toolbox.
The G20 is this Friday and Saturday with 19 countries in the EU in attendance. They represent more than 80% of the global gross domestic product. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Coming up, see how one group is working to help Christians withstand the pressure of a life in politics.
Well, faith in 2020. Democratic leaders are working to attract faith voters this time around. The party has hired a new religious outreach director. Reverend Derek Harkins, a senior vice president at New York's Union Seminary, is taking on that new role. It comes as presidential candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Cory Booker are emphasizing their faith on the campaign trail. Hillary Clinton was largely criticized for her faith outreach back in 2016, but Harkins tells Religion News Service it will be a priority for the party in 2020 and beyond.
Well, running for public office is a big decision, and Christian candidates often face an extra hurdle, defending their faith in an increasingly secular country.
But as Jennifer Wishon reports, there's a program helping prepare these men and women for what is ahead.
Here in the shadow of the U.S. Capitol Dome, Christians from across the country are gathering to learn how to put their faith into action inside America's halls of power.
This is an uphill climb.
Gathered in this glass conference room, Christian men and women considering a run for Congress are getting schooled on potential life as a candidate.
That's what politics is all about.
One lesson, how to stay composed during hostile media interviews.
How do I communicate my faith and my belief in God's word in a way that's not really throwing pearls to the swine, in a way that is drawing people in and not just providing fodder for them to attack?
They're becoming grounded in their biblical worldview, solidifying their political philosophy, and studying the Constitution.
Learning how to speak, with clarity, being able to debate, being able to negotiate.
Benjamin is a fellow at the D. James Kennedy Center for Christian Leadership. Over the course of 3 weeks, he and others get guidance on how to thoughtfully tackle tough issues like gender identity from experts like Ryan Anderson of the Heritage Foundation, an issue on which he says Christian candidates can offer real leadership.
You don't need to be a conservative Christian to have concerns about fifth grade boys being in your daughter's bathroom and locker room at school. You don't need to be a conservative Christian to have concerns about teenagers being placed on puberty-blocking drugs and then cross-sex hormones. Many Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of their religious beliefs, think that there's something wrong with giving a high school girl testosterone.
The faculty includes a number of Christian heavy hitters, including Janet and Craig Parshall.
Every law, every piece of legislation has a moral underpinning, and below that is a worldview of who God is and who we are in our relationship with Him.
Still, Janet Parshall says these candidates will face extra hurdles due to a growing perception that Christianity is outdated and narrow-minded.
So now imagine being a political candidate who has a bibliocentric worldview and has to push their message through the grid of the secular press.
And she adds winning may not always be God's purpose.
Getting your message across is marvelous, but don't ever forget the people to whom you are giving that message. Your first and most important role is ambassador for Christ.
Benjamin says the course is convicting him to check his ego.
Who are you really doing this for? Are you doing this for yourself? Are you doing this for the people? Or are you doing this for Jesus?
Lara Lee Cunningham learned about the training while reading a CBN News article about the center's annual Statesman Award.
Just excited about this program preparing Christians to fight for Jesus, because truly we are becoming a minority as far as it pertains to our voice, not having a voice.
I don't see how you can say that you love God and not fight for this country.
Craig Parshall says these candidates offer time-tested truth.
God wants guardrails in governance, and the guardrails are the biblical values that He shared with us, and those are eternal, and they're applicable to so many of the issues here in Washington or in local government as well.
But the skills these future candidates are learning is giving them their best shot to win. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
When we come back, how a victim of the California synagogue shooting is taking the fight against anti-Semitism to the world stage.
Well, a victim of anti-Semitic violence is calling on people across the world to fight darkness with light. It was part of a message Rabbi Goldstein delivered today at the United Nations.
Rabbi Goldstein was injured back in April when a shooter came into his California synagogue. Today, he used the world stage to remind people everywhere that they're made in the image of God.
We are all human beings created by God Almighty. We are all created by God for a reason. The day each one of you were born, God said the world can no longer exist without you. Each one of us need to look at each other as a human being, not by the color of our skin, not by our language, not by our religion, but we are all children of God. And this is what we need to begin realizing and appreciating. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. This is a problem for the world.
Rabbi Goldstein went on to say fighting anti-Semitism isn't about the future of civilization, asking members of the UN General Assembly, quote, do you want to live in a world of blood and tears or a world of love and beauty? What a great message to end on tonight.
Yeah, no kidding. Powerful words.
Well, that does it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.